Now that we've created a nice movie and even added video and interactivity to it, we might as well go through the publishing process and see how we can put this out to the web. I'm going to close up the Actions panel here for a moment. And mainly where we're going to go look, first of all, is in the Publish settings, which is under the File menu. I'll just go down here and select Publish Settings. And that'll bring up a panel with all of our settings that are used to create our movie files at the end. Right on the first page, you can see that the Flash SWIFT file and the HTML file formats are selected by default. And that's usually the method that you'll want to do to put out most Flash movies. We also have some options for some screenshot pictures, but the more important options are down here at the bottom with the projectors. If you check these two boxes, the program will create two new projector files, one for Windows and one for Mac, along with the web-enabled files with the HTML and your SWIFT. That just allows you a secondary option, if you want it, to be able to put your file up on maybe a CD-ROM, and then your users can take the CD-ROM and play back your files even if they don't have the Flash plugin installed. Of course, if you don't want those two options, you can just uncheck them, but I'm going to leave them on for now so we can see what the files look like. The biggest portion of our settings are going to be under the Flash tab, and the most important one is right at the top, Flash Player. I think I said this earlier, but it's worth repeating. If you need to publish for an earlier version of the Flash Player, maybe back to Flash 8 or Flash 9, set that right in advance, and that way the program will let you know in advance if you're using any functions that won't work with the player you've chosen. I'm going to leave ours at Flash Player 10, and you can see that we have next some settings about compression quality. When we import bitmap files into the program automatically compresses them into JPEGs if they're not JPEGs already, and it'll use this setting to do so. You can just change the value to whatever's going to be comfortable. We also have similar settings for our audio files, but I'd like to point out that the default settings are actually very low. So you may want to bump these up a bit. Keep in mind that your audio files are going to be a lot bigger than your bitmap files, but we generally don't have too many of them. And since our Flash movie doesn't have any sound files in it, I'm just going to leave them alone for now. Next we have the SWIFT settings, which I'm usually going to leave set exactly as they are. I usually want my movie compressed because we want it to be as small as possible. Include hidden layers is a feature that you may want to turn on or off. With this feature off, if you hide a layer in the timeline, it won't appear at all in your SWIFT file. Now the XMP metadata is kind of a nice place for you to add some information about yourself or your company to your file. If I just click on the settings, you'll notice you can add title, author, and descriptions about your file, and all this information is going to stick with the SWIFT file wherever it goes. I'm going to leave all that blank for right now, and we'll go back to the rest of our settings. In the advanced setting, the only one I really want to point out is the size report. I'm going to go ahead and turn that on for our publish in this setting. What that will do is it'll generate a report listing the size of every single item inside your SWIFT file. Now, if you want to pare down the size of the file, you can simply scan through the report and find out what the big items are and work on them first. And that'll make things a lot easier. The last tab we need to take a look at is the HTML tab. Now, there's not a lot of settings you're going to need to change here, but there are two important ones. The first one is the Detect Flash version. If you turn this on, the program will add JavaScript to your HTML page that will detect users that do not have the correct version of the Flash player to play your movie file back. Those users might have an old version of the player, or they might not have any player at all. What this will do is not only detect those users, but it will also help navigate them to the Adobe website where they can go ahead and get the Flash player and get it installed, and then be watching your movie file. It's an easy single-click device, but you don't have to turn it on either. You can publish your Flash movie without it, and all the users with the player installed will be able to see your Flash movie normally. Now, the second feature that's probably most important here, especially since we're using video and a controller with the full screen option, is this template up here at the top. We actually have a few other templates, but most of them you're not going to need very much, except for this one. We've got a Flash only template, which was our default, and we have a Flash only with an allow full screen option. If you want to have video inside your Flash file and you want to have the full screen button enabled in the controller, you'll have to select this option and the HTML will set it up so that full screen will work. It's an easy one to skip, so make sure and test your videos, and if the full screen's not working, just come right back in and change the template. Most of the rest of the settings are going to be minor things about how the Flash looks inside the page file. And notice there's a loop feature, but we've chosen to use ActionScript to control the looping inside of our movie, so it doesn't really matter here whether I turn it on or off. Now that's it for our settings. When I click OK, these settings will be saved with our FLA file, so we won't have to set them up again. And if we're ready to publish our movie, we can just hit Publish right here at the bottom while we're here. You can always just choose Publish from the File menu directly, and you don't have to go through the settings every time if you've already set them up. Now it looks like it's finished, so I'm just going to go ahead and click OK, and that'll close our panel and save our settings. The program has published our movie, but it's also dropped a whole bunch of text into the output window, and this is that report we were talking about. So let's take a look at that first. I'll scroll up to the top. And basically what we have here is a report of everything inside of our movie file and how big it is. And you can see it goes frame by frame and tells us how big each frame is going to be and adds them all up for us. If I scroll down here to the bottom of our frames, we can see that our movie is somewhere around 157K. We've also got detail listings of each symbol inside of our library file and how big those are. You can see that the chopper has a little bit more detail to it, with a little bit bigger file size. Down a little bit lower, we can see the fonts that are installed, and all the characters that we've used, and how much room that's taking up. And we can also see that our ActionScript takes up a little bit of space as well. Our video file is big, but it's not part of the SWF file, so it's only listing the FLV playback dependency and not the actual video itself. By default, the Publish option is going to put all those files in the same folder as our FLA file. So let me just go out to my folder out here on the desktop. And we can see we've got a lot more files than we did before. When your files are published, the biggest question most people ask are, which files do I actually need to send off to the client? Well, if you're doing a CD-ROM version, you'll of course need the Mac and the PC executable application files. But you'll also need the F4V files. Remember, those are going to be external from the application, and they'll always have to be tagged on to whatever you're sending. In addition, notice that our controller file is a separate SWF as well. So when you're including video in your application, don't forget to put the controller file in with the other files. Now if you're doing an HTML version, we'll need the HTML, the SWF, and of course the controller and the video files as well. There's a couple files that we can always leave behind. Since I'm using Flash versions of my movie file, I won't ever need to include this QuickTime version. And your FLA file can always stay behind. The SWF file it creates is completely separate from it and is deliverable without the FLA file being there at all. You'll just want to put that in a safe place so that you can make edits and changes to it whenever you need to. Well, that's pretty much it for our application. I hope you had a good time putting your Flash movie together, and that you take the time to practice making Flash animations and movies on your own. Well, time's up for this series. I hope you've taken it all in and are ready to go out and put together your own Flash projects. On behalf of the Total Training team, I want to thank you for watching, and as always, happy flashing.